Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I'm your host, Ali, the manager at Enlighteens Education. You probably heard about the big news from College Board that they will no longer offer SAT subject test or SAT with essay. And this is the reason that we have our senior consultant, Daniel, here to talk about is SAT or ACT still useful in 2021? So before we start the webinar, please let me introduce a little bit about Enlighteens and what we do. We are a group of educators who have many years of experience in college admissions consulting and working with families in the Bay Area and beyond. Enlighteens Education offers personalized college planning services and strengths-based mentoring approach to identify each student's character, interest, strengths, opportunities, and discover a unique education path to realize their long-term goals. This includes guiding families through the confusing college applications process, course selection, extracurricular activities, summer planning, and test prep. Our offices in Cupertino and Pleasanton are home to our full-time consultants and support staffs with an average of 8 years of experience. Our years of teamwork also let us offer stability and a high level of synergy. All right, now let me give the stage to Daniel and get started.
All right, thanks very much, Ali. Okay, so yeah, hey everyone. I'm gonna go ahead and introduce myself a little bit first. My name is Daniel. I am a graduate of Lynbrook High School in San Jose, California, in the Bay Area. Actually, my family moved to America when I was just 4, so I basically grew up in that area. If you're familiar, Dilworth, Miller, and then Lynbrook. During my time in high school, I was involved in a variety of things. So anything from leadership to music, sports. I was at work experience clubs, volunteering, and numerous awards. So basically, the first year of high school, I was mostly involved in marching band. I played drums. The summer between freshman and sophomore year, I got more involved in work experience. I worked at AMC Theaters in Saratoga. Then my sophomore year, I played football for the school. And then in junior year, I got involved with class office. And by senior year, I was class president. And then in the meantime, I was volunteering and part of clubs, and that resulted in some awards as well. So after Lynbrook, I went to UC Irvine, where I studied anthropology and sociology. During my time in college, I volunteered to teach English, and I just found my passion. I realized I just love teaching and I love helping others. So I returned to the Bay Area. I went to San Jose State to their really good TESOL program, and now I also teach college level ESL. So my background is from education and consulting already with peer counseling on campus. So I have background in test prep, like I said, ESL, and mostly college essays. I work a lot with high school seniors, right, applying to college. So mainly how to communicate their like the values and perspectives, right, the things that really highlight and showcase the student who they are individuals, and we try to highlight that in their writing. Usually, kind of difficult for a lot of students because they're not really used to writing about themselves like that. So I usually tell students, right, if you don't tell them, they're not going to know, but you don't want to brag either, right? You don't want to just repeat things. So how do you really, talk about yourself in that way? Okay, so that's a little bit about myself. So here's our agenda for today. We'll start with the weekly education news update. Then we have admissions trends on SAT, ACT, like we mentioned, the subject tests we'll talk about. There's some more info we can kind of extract when we look at early admissions data, and we'll take a look at this year's early admissions data. And then that'll segue us into individualized test prep and summer planning. How do we advise certain students, right? Not every student is the same, not every profile is the same. So how do we individualize the plans for students to make the best use of their time, since we know time is the most important factor here. We only have these 4 years. So how do we divvy up this time? How do we use that time well and prepare us for college applications? So how do we utilize the summer, right, to get ready for that? So let's get started. All right, weekly education news. There are five trends that we're going to look at for 2021. So trend 1. Colleges want to see applicants, right, with the internal drive and resilience to lead something bigger than themselves. This is something that's been true, not just for 2021, even earlier, even before. You've probably heard in the past, even 4 or 5 years, UC admissions rates, right, are going down and down. Colleges across the board, admissions rates going down and down. You might even hear stories from family members, from friends, like, oh yeah, my friend's kid, had this really high GPA, high test score, still got denied by, like a mid-level UC or even lower level UC. Why, right? So yes, there is this trend, there's this pattern, all the schools are looking for more, even more. And so stories of adaptability, ingenuity, and community mindedness will especially impress, right, as we continue in this pandemic era. This was true even before the pandemic, right? If you only have really high test scores and high GPAs, that's not enough. That's really not enough. Colleges want a well-rounded student nowadays. So that means, we've already been focused on this, more extracurriculars, right? More things to focus on to balance your profile. All right, trend number 2. Top tier universities, which have de-emphasized test scores, has grown to over 900 campuses. Okay, so you've heard a lot of schools, they say they're test optional or test blind or test whatever, right? So universities in which an SAT or ACT score is optional tend to accept students with test scores more frequently than they do students without. And this was also true when we analyzed the US News ranking system a couple years ago. You notice that they look for the US News to rank a college, they look for the average test score of students coming into that college. And for a while, the US News ranking did not rank a school if the school accepted fewer than 75% of their incoming freshmen without a test score. Right, so this is a famous or well-known example I always mention. Remind us of Wake Forest University. They went test optional like more than a decade ago, yet the number of students who submit a score and were accepted is still above 75%. So for example, UPenn, University of Pennsylvania, 75% of students admitted in the early round submitted standardized test scores. And that matches exactly the US News ranking percentage that they had for a while, whereas only 25% did not. So how do we react to this news, right? The first thing is, test scores are still important. And I'll talk more about this later, but especially for private schools, there's a big reason for that. All right, trend 3. More students will continue to apply to early admissions programs. We know that, right? We've been telling and we've been hearing people, like, oh yeah, my kid is just applying to as many schools as possible, right? Common App, right? Fill all 20 applications. So in the fall of 2020, early admission applications to UPenn rose by 23%. MIT saw an unprecedented 62% increase in early applications. Harvard has seen an increase of 57%. This is the same as just regular admissions rates. When we looked at regular admissions rates rise in the past couple of decades, it's just mainly because students are applying to more colleges, more schools. Things are a lot easier now. We have the internet, we have the Common App, we have, you can copy paste a lot of things. So yeah, you can just, a lot of the kids call this shotgunning, right? You just shoot to all the schools, you apply to all the schools as possible. And now we're seeing that trend going into the early round as well, which just kind of makes sense. So we're gonna see some declines across the board. Trend 4, the return of international students, right? So the recent presidential administration, the policies resulted in a drastic decrease in the number of international student visas issued from more than 600,000 back in 2015 to almost half, right? 364,000 in 2019. So we should see, we predict, right, there's going to be a rise of international students returning to campus. What does this mean, right? We have to try to think about things from college perspective. What percent of international students do they want? Do they want to return to like a 2015 level in terms of the ratio of international students? And once we look at that, look at campus size, did their campus increase? Are they still accepting about the same number of students? However, are they receiving more applications than ever before? So, at admissions rate, that percentage is just a number. We have to really look deeper to understand, right, the context behind that number. All right, trend 5, the pandemic caused many students consider a non-traditional start to college. You heard a lot of students, you saw in the news, students taking gap years. This rose significantly in the fall of 2020. For the foreseeable future, if this continues, then the class of 2021 may choose a similar path and defer their college admissions, right? Especially to explore non-academic interests. And this especially applies maybe to families who were hit hardest by the pandemic. Maybe there are a lot of students who are very qualified, but maybe their family situations do not allow them to go to college yet. So these are also things to keep in mind, just a lot of context to consider for 2021. Right, so admissions trend. So you saw the news. This is exactly what College Board said. We are no longer offering SAT subject tests in the US. We will also discontinue the optional SAT essay after the June 2021 test. We're reducing demands on students. So let's take a look at what they say and see if there's maybe something else that they're saying with it, right? Especially this highlighted part. The expanded reach of AP and its widespread availability means the subject tests are no longer necessary for students to show what they know. Okay, so let's think about this from an educator's perspective. They're trying to say that they're reallocating the resources to AP tests. So what does this mean? What does this suggest? Right, so the expanded reach of AP, right? So what they're saying is they're reallocating their resources to the AP exam. And we know this is probably a little bit more lucrative if we think about how many high schools there are across the country, how many AP classes are offered, right? And how many AP exams might be taken by students who take AP classes. It kind of makes sense, especially if they have already gone online, gone remote with their testing, for AP testing, I mean. So it seems like they're probably focusing more on that. So if colleges know that, then perhaps, right, this is all speculation, but based on information, we can strongly predict that AP tests are going to be even more important, especially if subject tests are taken out. And this has also been echoed by UC panelists, UC counselors. During their counselor conferences, they did mention that they're going to be looking more at GPA and APs moving forward, especially since UCs have already, they're not looking at SAT or ACT at all, right? So a lot of counselors from high schools were asking, well, then what are you going to look at, right? And they didn't exactly say it, but they heavily, right, alluded to AP tests. So yeah, this is something that's very important especially for our students. Think about what colleges look for, their admissions factors. One of the biggest things is the strength of the rigor of their secondary school transcript. So classes, if your school offers AP classes and you don't take them, right, that'll be held against you strongly as a factor in admissions, right? And that with GPA is usually most important for a lot of colleges, because after all, students' first job is a student, right? Students' first job is to know knowledge, to learn well. And that is reflected in GPA and now AP testing, since that's kind of like the main standardized test now. Okay. AP provides a much richer and more flexible way for students to distinguish themselves. Okay, the wide availability of AP programs make subject tests less necessary. More than 1.2 million students in high school, class of 2019, took at least one AP test. I took at least one AP test. If you go to the AP section of the College Board website, you also see that they mysteriously did away, they took away those National AP Scholar Awards. I think on one hand, they know that the AP test nowadays is a little different, right? Especially since it's online, although they usually say it's about the same. So maybe internally they are having these discussions, and this award is no longer maybe consistent, right, with the in-person test. So we may see some revisions to AP tests moving forward as well. We may see new awards and achievements, or rewards basically, for doing well on APs. But even without a name, a label, right, colleges are still very familiar with students who can get 4s and 5s on, let's say, like 8 or more AP tests, right? That's outstanding. So that's still a target to aim for. Optional essay adds 50 minutes to the main test. Its score is recorded separately and does not factor into the main score. Right, so this is just some context for any of us who's unfamiliar. The essay was never part of the SAT score, the SAT essay. Right? Its score was reported separately, does not factor. About 1.2 million students in the class of 2020 took the SAT with the essay, more than half of all who took the exam. So even though they have the numbers and they know that more than half of the students took the exam, they still know that, we don't really need the essay anymore, right? I think this also comes from a lot of colleges. They never really use the essay anyway. I remember, some schools, they say they might use the essay to place you into your writing level, but they can also just use the multiple choice section for that, right? Usually if you score somewhere about like 700 above for the English and the writing and language and the reading sections, they usually use that for internal placement for what English class you start with as a freshman anyway. So yeah, that hasn't really been an issue. The fact that they did away with the subject test as well, right, the writing section, then yeah, they're really just just using the SAT, the main SAT test. Enthusiasm for these essays has waned, right, decreased. Many colleges have found the essay scores, right, not useful or necessary. All right, 2013 study back in the day, conducted by admissions officials, found almost no difference in the first year GPA for students who took 5 college level classes during high school compared with those who took 6 or more. Okay, so again, if you take 5 AP classes throughout high school, right, your GPA in college, your first year GPA in college was no different than students who took 6 AP or college level courses during high school or more. So based on these findings, right, the encouragement is for students to pursue at least 5 college level courses during high school. So that means at least 5 AP classes throughout high school. And that's just at least, right? That's a minimum. So if you can take more, of course, right? That's great. If you can take more college level courses, community college or online or, wherever, whatever you can to get more college level courses, right? That 5 is the minimum that a college is recommending. All right, so let's see. We also have honors. Honors courses or classes taken at a local college can be equally impressive as passing AP exams, right? And that's true because if you're taking an AP class, it's a college level course that's modified for high school. But if you're taking a college level course that's meant for college students, right, and you do well in that, then yeah, that's as good or not, maybe even better than passing an AP exam. And especially if you do well in that class, right, versus getting a 3 on an AP exam. Having 6 AP courses is not perceived to be twice as impressive as having 3 though. Right? Having 6 AP courses is not perceived as twice as impressive. The courses begin to take place of other important life activities such as college applications, sports, socializing, part-time jobs, and self-reflection, right? So what this is a healthy reminder that yes, AP classes are important, but just because you take more doesn't automatically make your profile more impressive, right? Again, that's just one part of a student's overall profile. You can focus a lot of time and energy in all these AP classes, high GPA, high test scores, but that could have taken time away from developing other parts of your profile. And that could actually be the difference between admissions and rejected. All right, so speaking of admissions, let's take a look at some early admissions data. According to the New York Times, the data on early decision applications this month showed a slightly smaller number of students applying to college, especially, right, the context here, especially from low-income families. Although those that did were trying their luck at more schools than usual, okay, so just applying to more schools. So yes, we did see a slightly smaller number of students applying to college overall, right? And again, especially from low-income students. So that could be again from families, students from families that are not quite ready to support them going to college right away. And we have some other numbers just down the list here. Brown, we saw a 22 rise in early decision applications, right? Not the admissions rate, just the application, number of applications. Dartmouth, 29% increase. Duke, 16% increase. Harvard, we noticed, was 57% increase. MIT, 62%. Penn, 23. Yale, 38. Okay, so across the board, about 25 or higher, right? In some cases, 50 or higher increase. Penn had a record low ED acceptance rate of 15%, which dropped almost 5% from last year's rate. Okay, so this is just the same as we saw in the trend for regular admissions. More students are applying, that acceptance rate has to go down. The colleges can't accept that influx, that increase of new students. They just don't have space. So if more students applying ED, then sure, acceptance rate's going down. So Dartmouth, 5% drop to a 21% acceptance rate for ED. Duke, 4% drop to 16%. Harvard, 6% drop to 7%. MIT, 2% drop to 4.8%. And then Yale, 3% drop to 10%. So what is some of this truth here? Amherst College received 857 early decision applicants this admissions cycle, which represents a 43% increase over last year, right? 43%. This led to a 25% ED admit rate, which is down from a 32%, right? So down about 7. University of Virginia receives over 16,000 applications for regular decision admission to the class of 2025. bringing total applicant pool to nearly 48,000. 48,000. Compared to 2019, early decision applications increased by 35%. Early action applications increased by 15%. So yes, more and more students are applying early. Out of all early applicants, 39% applied without submitting test scores. Right? Think about that. 39% applied without submitting test scores, about 40. So that means 60% of students still submitted an SAT or ACT score. The early decision acceptance rate for in-state applicants was just 39% compared to a rate of 25%, even lower for out-of-state early decision applicants. Okay, so keep that in mind. 39% applied without submitting test results. So if you want to do some math here, you can just try to see just potential minimum, maximum, like what percent of students had or didn't have test scores here. Out of the early decision applicants, 26% were deferred. But here's the thing, of the accepted students under early decision, 8% are first generation college students and 14.5% are legacy students. This is something that we have to, again, context matters. So we have to keep this in mind when we're thinking about sending our students to private schools, out of state. We have to think about first generation as a status as well, right? Are these students first generations college students? Are they the first in their family to go to college in America? 14.5% are legacy students. So do we have any hooks? Do you have any ties, family ties, alumni, right, to these schools as well? In addition, 57% are white, 31% underrepresented minority students, 7.5% international, 4% did not provide. So another thing is to keep in mind the demographics. So usually this is something we can look at, right, maybe through some of the reports that the colleges publish every year. You can see what percent of their student population, we've got male, female, we've got gender, we've got ethnicity. We can try to figure out, like, hey, let's say if you're an Asian male, right, is that going to help you or hurt you at this school, right? So something to keep in mind for every student, it's going to be a little different. So then not just that, but also other factors that are more common, like your GPA, your major, right? So if you're an Asian male, like what GPA do you have to have then to kind of be above the average curve or something, which is, something we'll talk about a little later here as well when we talk about individual performance. Okay, so individualized test prep and summer planning. There are a lot of things we have to consider, and this is where I'm going to spend most of the time talking about this. As a teacher, right, I have lots of experience teaching ACT and SAT. Usually, again, this is usually for most students, I do recommend ACT. And this is what I recommend students who maybe they're native speakers, they grew up using English, they're very comfortable with it. They don't really have any issues with reading speed. They don't really have any issues with maybe like attention to detail. They can find the details in the readings fairly quickly. If not, then we can always talk about improving their annotation strategies or something like that. But ACT does reward reading speed and attention to detail. Now, SAT might be better for students who maybe their strength is more like math because it's equal, right? You got 800 points in math and then 800 points in the English. I would say if you are stronger in math, right, then you're aiming for 800 in SAT anyway. So you already got like half the points right there. And then for the grammar section, usually I would say it's like punctuation, a lot of like these grammar rules that most schools don't really talk about. This is something very common. I ask my students, hey, did your teacher ever teach you this? Did any of your past teachers ever teach you this? No, no, not really. I think maybe my 5th grade teacher taught me once, right? But I totally forgot. Like all these punctuation rules that the SAT and ACT expect students to know. High school curriculum is usually based on more essay writing, analysis, right? Reading a lot of fiction, reading poetry, and analyzing rhetoric. So yeah, not really punctuation, right? So there's going to be some of that missing probably. For the reading section on the SAT, for example, there's a lot of vocabulary. So that means got to study and read a lot. So again, SAT I would say is more for students who they take a little bit more time, but they're more careful. Right? You have to be really, really careful on SAT, but it rewards you for being careful because you do have more time per question, and you have to be very logical. The SAT is more of a logical reasoning test than anything, compared to ACT is more like quantity, right? SAT is more like quality. So it kind of depends on the student's personality, mindset, logic, deduction, all these kind of things. But I would also say as a whole, we have to consider the student's background in math and science. Because the ACT does have that like kind of science kind of section, but it's not really science. Usually I say try both, right? Let's try both. Let's see which one you do better on at first. Practice that one, and then if you feel like you hit a ceiling, let's switch back to the other one. I had a student who had the same exact experience, right? He's kind of stuck around 1500. It's like, okay, then try ACT, right? He had never heard of ACT. So try ACT, teach him, pros and cons of each test, and then to show him some of the things that the ACT usually tricks students on, so that he's, kind of prepared. Took his first test, and his equivalent score was immediately higher than the highest SAT score he had ever gotten, right? He was just better fit for ACT. Now, in terms of this topic, right, individualized test prep and summer planning, remember at the beginning I talked about time, right? Time is very, very important. What I mean by this is, if you really think about it, you have to start thinking about applications by the beginning of senior year, because let's say you're doing some early decision stuff, early action stuff. That means you have to contact your letters of recommenders. So that means your teachers. You need to usually let them know near the beginning of the school year, right? Some teachers are very strict, they're very busy. You have to tell them immediately. You have to tell them within the first month of school, something like that. So you have to make that decision even earlier. It might take you a little bit of time. So maybe that summer before senior year, you're gonna take some time, discuss, think about all the schools and majors and locations, things like that. So that means really that leaves you about 3 years, right? So that means you have 9th, 10th, and 11th to get your test scores, out of the way. Because how can you really, let's say, accurately predict your college list if you don't have an idea of what your test scores are? So GPA is one thing, right? We can kind of predict as we see the patterns, but if you don't have any test scores, right, like that's going to be a big drawback here. So having a test score earlier than later is also a help. But then if we do it too early, right, then we run into issues like, well, math, right? Maybe my math is not his or her strong suit. So then he or she's not quite ready for the math. But maybe the English is fine, maybe some tutoring on the side, maybe some focus, maybe some help. We can, still get that a little higher. But we want to spend those first 2 years. I sometimes recommend, as early as like 8th grade, at least do the English section, because English is always English. Grammar is grammar. Punctuation is just, a comma is always going to be a comma in terms of the rules. But yes, you might need to compartmentalize the math section, meaning like you might need to put that to the side a little bit as your student continues math in high school. But yeah, you want to start figuring out as early as possible, right? Maybe ideally 10th grade, 11th grade, get the test scores out of the way. All right, one more thing is ACT super scoring. This is a policy that the ACT is trying to announce as official. They wanted to do it this year, but it seems like they delayed it due to COVID. But super scoring, for those who are unfamiliar, remember the ACT has 4 sections. You have the English grammar section first, then second you have math, third you have reading, and fourth you have science, which is you're just kind of looking for charts and graphs, finding answers within charts and graphs. So yeah, your super scoring is, let's say you take the test 2 times. Maybe the first time you do better in English and grammar, and then the second time you do better, you score even higher on the math and the science. So super scoring will take your best scores from all of your tests and put together, and that's called your super score, right? So that means it would take your English and reading from the first test, and then it will combine it with your STEM, your math and science from the second test. So your super score would be higher than your individual, any one sitting test score. And that is something that a lot of colleges look at as well. So again, there's a natural sort of like an advantage, a benefit of going the ACT direction. But like I said, depends on the student. And for most students whose first language is not English, they usually tend to do better on SAT, right? So again, it's individualized. Fit with your major. So what I mean by this is, yes, let's say you are STEM, right? Let's say you are, maybe English is not your first language and you're really, really good at math. Well, SAT, right? Most likely SAT for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. Let's say you're not great at math and you want still a high standardized test score. So then for the opposite reasons, maybe we go with ACT, because ACT, the overall score, the composite is an average of those 4 sections. Whereas SAT is just, you just add those 800 points up, right? So every question you miss, you're losing points. And then your overall score is just gonna be lower and lower every time you miss a question. The ACT is an average. So let's say you're really good at English, really good at reading and grammar. right? And your science is pretty good because it's logic, but then math, maybe your math is just your weakest point. Well, that's okay, because ACT will be an average of those 4 sections. Okay. So fit with your major usually is what I mean is like, what are your strengths already as your academic background and strengths? Utilizing summertime. All right, so I actually have some examples and some real case scenarios to share with us here. Summertime. Sometimes I get students who come to me a little bit too late, but I wouldn't say late. I wish I had met them earlier, right? Because maybe they did something that makes sense, but it doesn't make sense from a college perspective. And let me elaborate. Colleges usually, like I said earlier, right, a couple of slides, they're looking for you to go beyond your grades, right? Go beyond your test scores and really highlight something you're really capable of. So you can express this in demonstrated abilities and talents, right? Your extracurriculars, achievements, awards. So sometimes I do get students, they put a lot of time, for example, let's say into sports, and then they also put a lot of time into, let's say, something like academics, and then maybe also like music, right? Let's just say those 3. And then I ask them, what do you want to major in? And it's like something that's not music, right? Something that's not their strengths in GPA, in their test scores, in their classes, right? For example, maybe I get a student who has like low STEM grades, but they actually want to major in STEM, right? Or they really want to major in psychology, but they never took a psychology course or anything related to psychology. So I guess this is what I mean. I sometimes, if I could meet students earlier, right, I can give them better advice about how to plan out their 4 years in high school, because we want to utilize all the time that you have. And this also includes summer, right? We have a lot of students, usually the question is like, oh, what should I do? What should I do over the summer? All right. Well, don't just play video games, right? Don't just play Fortnite or Valorant or whatever the most recent game now is. Don't just play that all summer, right? Actually, I had a student like, hey, I spent all my summer getting like platinum ranking in League of Legends. Like, okay, that's nice, but now what, right? Like now that we're meeting together, that's maybe you're not gonna study that in college, are you, right? So that's not the best use of time. Find some balance in your life. So GPA, if your GPA is weak, then there are strategies for that. You can utilize summer. You can take some college courses. You find some classes that kind of fit your direction, the direction that you want for college. Tests. So if you are planning to take a test, in like a SAT or ACT, right? If you're gonna plan on taking that in the fall, let's say, because they don't offer summer sessions, right? So if you summer dates, test dates. So let's say you're aiming for the first fall or the second fall test date. Well, then how do you want to utilize your summer to do that? Now, just a word of caution. It depends on each student. If GPA and tests are your weakness, then you might need some extra time, because during the regular school year, you might be already very maybe like putting a lot of effort into just maintaining your GPA, right? So that it kind of is different for each student. But I would say if your student is capable of keeping GPA high, test stuff for school, and also has enough time to focus on test prep during the school year, that would be the best, because the next thing here is activities. Right? Activities and demonstrating interest are really, really important as well. So a couple of activities that we recommend for the summer. Of course, there are summer programs, right? But there are a lot of things you can do locally. Kind of just depends on your profile again, your students' skills, interests. Students who are good with music and they have an interest in maybe psychology, well, maybe they might be interested in using their music to help society somehow, right? So I've heard of students coming up with their own ideas after some discussion about playing music for some group, some organization. Like, yes, exactly, right? Just like that. Because colleges, right? Colleges, they want to see realistic activities. Typically, colleges can tell when students are told what to do, because it doesn't really seem like a natural progression for this student to be involved in certain activities. So yeah, there's also that to keep in mind, right? There's the P word, passion. Right? Colleges, they want to see passion, but they never want to read about it. They don't want to see the word passion in your essays. They want a sense of feeling, of authentic, genuine interest in what you do. Right? They can kind of smell it when you're kind of faking it a little bit. And then what I mean by this, right, is demonstrated interest. On one hand, there's demonstrated interest for colleges, meaning they hope that you attend as many of their colleges' tours, right, events, college-sponsored events like that. You sign up for things and they make sure that you actually attend. But what I mean by here with this phrase is you're demonstrating interest in your major, right? Too often I get seniors who, meet me for the first time and say, I want to study this, right? I want to study business. Why, right? Usually my first question is why? Oh, well, because I like this or that. And then I look at the profile, like, well, your profile doesn't demonstrate interest in business, right? When did you want to start learning business? When did you start, this interest in business? Like, my whole life, all right? Or eighth grade, ninth grade. Like, but I really don't. I really don't see anything that, matches business. And then maybe we talk some more and we realize like, oh, actually it's not business that this person's interested in, because business is very broad, right? Just like English is very broad, science is very broad, right? Math is very broad, even CS is very broad. So we try to break it down. It's like, okay, so what about business do you like? Oh, I kind of like accounting or finance, right? Or stock market kind of stuff. Like, okay, that's better. And then so now how do we show that? How do we demonstrate to colleges that you want finance, not just business? So yeah, we've got to find some activities. We're going to find something to do over the summer. Usually that's more like finance related, for example. Okay, so summer planning is all about ideally getting all your test prep and GPA stuff out of the way during the regular school year, so that you have a lot of time to invest and focus on yourself, right, in here during the summer. So that would be these activities and such. Also keep in mind, a lot of programs, they might ask for a SAT score or ACT score. So that would be something important to have as well, right? If you're thinking about applying for a competitive program, maybe like 11th grade, rising 11th, rising 12th grade. Courses and programs at target schools. This is something to also consider. A lot of schools, especially the well-known, popular schools. I'm talking about all the top-ranked, high-ranked schools. We're talking about Columbia, right? Stanford, Berkeley, Harvard, MIT. You can just very, very quickly Google this, right? Summer program, pre-college. You can take these summer classes for high schoolers, usually, mostly high schoolers. You can take these classes at these places, these schools, these universities. And this year especially is very unique. I think it's a very unique opportunity. You don't have to go there because of the pandemic. You can join them virtually, right? So let's just think about this as an example. You get into a prestigious, university pre-college program. Let's say I apply for like a Stanford summer class, right? I get in, and then the class is taught by a faculty member at Stanford, right? And I get to know the teacher very well. I get to know the professor very well, right? I'm very proactive. I'm very interactive with the professor, and eventually I ask that professor for a letter of recommendation, perhaps. Okay, so imagine how strong that letter of recommendation could be coming from the school, your dream school. This is also maybe an avenue to explore, right? This is something very similar that I've had in the past as well with other students. In fact, I had a student, he was really nervous about getting into a summer class. He was on the wait list. He wasn't sure if he would get in. And I said, hey, don't worry. I have that experience as well, right? Like having students on wait list. Just email her, introduce yourself, right? Tell her about yourself. Tell her about, your GPA, your test scores. Right? Show that you're a good student, first of all, because teachers like to have good students in classes. It's less work for them, honestly. So yeah, he did that. Talked about his interest, and turns out that his teacher, his professor, would-be professor, shared a lot of the same interests and activities even back when she was in high school and college. And so instantly, right, they had this connection, this rapport. He was very enthusiastic about the course itself. He talked to her a lot after class, before class. Eventually, I said like, hey, yeah, it sounds like, you guys like each other, at least, respect each other and stuff too, right? As a student-teacher relationship, just, what could hurt, right? Ask her for a letter of recommendation. She said yes, and that turned out very, very well. So yes, what I mean by this is a large part of this is also on students, right? We can tell our students to do this and that, right? We can ask them to do this. Sometimes we even demand them to do this or that, right? But maybe that might not always have the best results, because we also need a student who is willing, right? We need students who are motivated and wanting to follow advice, right? And do these, because they maybe have a better idea of why they're doing it, right? A lot of our students, the first thing is like, I don't know like how college, works. I don't know the application process. I don't know why they want GPA, right? And then we talk about it, we show it to them, and it's like, oh, I get it. I need to get A's, huh? I need to do better, huh? Like, yeah, it's never too late, right? It's never too late to do better. Okay. So yes, thinking about that as well, right? There's a holistic way of viewing college, and I mean summer, especially summer, right? How to utilize your summer to your benefit. So yeah, this is what I mean. Effective use of time. Yes, students procrastinate. Yes, we've seen a lot of students procrastinate more, especially with the online learning, right? A lot of students are more distracted nowadays. But that is exactly what's going to separate students, right? And we've seen this. We've seen students' GPAs, if they were a good studier, right? They had strong study habits already, then distance learning didn't affect them too much, right? In fact, maybe their GPA even went up because they had a little less stress from the commute or whatever it is, maybe less time doing activities that were canceled like sports, and maybe more time in studying. So if they already have strong study habits, right, yeah, that's fine. But maybe students with weaker study habits, we've seen this as well, right? After they go into distance learning, maybe GPA is tanking a little bit, so maybe now getting B's or C's or even D's. So how do we have effective use of time? If our first and foremost, our primary job as students is to be a student, is to have a high GPA, like high test scores, things like that, then yes, we need to make sure we do that. So those are some things to fix maybe during summer as well. Okay, so this is what I mean is if you're taking classes to boost GPA, if you're doing activities, right, because you already have a strong GPA profile, summer is not the ideal time to be worrying about test prep, right? But again, that's case by case. That depends on each student. Right? Maybe that is your major weakness before you think about anything else, right? We would have to see each student's background. All right. According to research from Princeton University, students who identify as Asian must score as, on average, 140 points higher on the SAT than whites to have the same chance of admission to private colleges. They must score 450 points higher on the SAT than African Americans, and this has been what's labeled an Asian tax, right, that some refer to. Okay, so yeah, there's not much to say here, right? Victim of success, basically. So you have to, there's a higher bar, there's a higher standard based on your ethnic background. Right? And like I said earlier, if you look at your target schools, if you look at their diversity on campus, what their demographic breakdown is, right? That doesn't really change from year to year. So you can think about, how you would have to kind of compete for how many spots available in that school each year. Colleges have historically been able to work around the Supreme Court's ruling, by avoiding explicit race-based quotas and by arguing that their admissions committees evaluate applicants holistically, right? How many times have we heard this word in the past decade? Taking into consideration a range of both academic and more intangible non-academic factors, right? So especially UCs, right? But a lot of schools, we look at applications holistically. We look at everything. We look at, right, all these different factors, right? UCs even publish all their different factors. Asians are, on average, academically high achieving, but are also, on average, lower achieving non-academically, right? So extracurriculars, anything that's not related to like a grade or a test score. And this accounts for the discrepancy, the difference in studies that focus too much on standardized test scores. Okay, so this is one way to contextualize the information we saw in the previous slide. Sure, right? Sure, Asians have to score higher to get in if we look at the numbers after the fact, but why? Why are the colleges accepting higher test score students who are Asian? Maybe because, right, otherwise the overall profile is not balanced enough. Maybe there aren't enough non-academic interesting factors in those student profiles, right? So how do you separate yourself, right? Is it to beat them out in GPA and test score, right? Like, because how many people are trying to fit into that one door already, right? How many Asians are trying to squeeze into schools using GPA and test scores? So what else, right? What else can you do? What are their majors? What are their extracurricular activities, right? What else? What else? In addition to, again, your first job is a student. So yeah, you do have to have a strong GPA and test score, right? There's no denying that. But it depends on what schools you're targeting. For example, if you want to go to like a top 10, top 15 school, unfortunately, we adults know this, to get your foot in the door, right? Just to get an interview with the company. So yes, just to have have a chance, right, to get your profile looked at, your admissions profile looked at as a high school student. Yeah, you do need to have GPA and test scores, but that's not it, right? That's just the foot in the door. All right, you need to score higher academically on both your GPA and standardized tests because Asian applicants are currently judged at a higher standard for the time being. You need to show that you're also non-academically high achieving, which doesn't simply mean being first chair in orchestra or editor-in-chief of the newspaper, right? Again, put in context, how many high schools are there? How many first chairs of orchestra are there, right? At selective U.S. colleges, admissions officers appear to have a bias against what they consider one-dimensional Asian applicants, those who seem to only focus on grades and test scores. Okay, they've seen enough. They've seen enough. Let's see. Elite universities give added weight in admissions decisions to applicants who have SAT scores above 1,500, are African American, or are recruited athletes. Right. This is based on a study they performed. A smaller but still important preference is shown to Hispanic students and to children of alumni. The athlete admission advantage has been growing, while the underrepresented minority advantage has declined. Elite colleges and universities extend preferences to many types of students, yet affirmative action, the only preference given to underrepresented minority applicants, is the one surrounded by the most controversy. Right? So this is just to remind us that there are a lot of biases that already exist, right? Whether it's to alumni, whether it's to athletes. Right? There are a lot of things that we're just kind of fighting, right, as high school students to get into these top elite universities. So remember earlier I said there's a difference between public and private. Think about something like public, UC, CSUs, right, community college, the whole campus system in California. They get a lot of their funding from the state, right? They get their funding from the state, so they have to follow certain rules, let's say, certain expectations. Private schools have a little more freedom there, right? So, all that said, right, what are the main takeaways from today? So yes, we do have a trend toward AP and GPA focus, and also non-academic factors, right? Non-academic factors. So that means using those summers especially to focus on those non-academic factors. We have this question that we have to strongly consider for every student. How do I position myself to maximize my admissions odds based on my profile, right? I need to cater to my strengths, right? What kind of profile do I have? Do you have? If I am not great with grades, then why should I force myself to only focus on grades, right? So what I mean is, yes, of course you need to do your best and get as high grades as possible. But sometimes there's that, maybe it's just you're diminishing, rate of return there. If I study really, really hard, right, and get straight A's, but then I spend all my time getting straight A's and I don't have anything else left in my profile, right? That's, maybe that's not as great as having more of a balance and focusing on strengths. For example, I met a student, she started her own company. She and her friends started her own company, and she used CS to create a virtual reality app, right? And so that meant she had to teach herself how to use Unity. She had to teach herself how to use Unreal Engine. She had to, use YouTube and just teach herself all these things because she didn't really have the opportunity to do that at school in her CS class. So because she spent so much time doing these other things, her GPA suffered, right? So her GPA was in the 3, like maybe mid or lower 3s. But the schools, right, they all loved her extracurriculars and what she was doing there. So I do have students who have, they have a strong passion for what they're doing, and they're doing it well. And that's, what's going to help them stand out a little bit more in this sea of applications, right? Especially since colleges are accepting or receiving so many applications. All right. And the other thing is, just again, a reminder, right? Effective use of time remaining. If I look at your profile, if you're a sophomore, if you're a junior, if you're a rising senior, what's the idea here? What do you have as the things that stand out on your profile? What is still maybe could be improved, and what maybe you can just not worry about anymore, right? For example, I have students asking me like, oh, should I continue like doing sports? All right, well, is it taking a lot of time? Yes. Right, it takes like 20, 30 hours a week. Okay. What do you want to study? Something unrelated to sports, unrelated to whatever that is. I want to study. My real passion is here or there, right? Well, then let's think about it, right? Let's talk about how you can maybe you love sports. Maybe you don't need to stop doing sports completely, right? Maybe for your own mental health or happiness or whatever. But maybe we can find a better balance, effective use of your time. All right, so speaking of that, actually, just a friendly reminder, we do have a boot camp coming up this spring, this semester, basically, right? So this January through April 18th. You may have heard we did something similar over the winter, And as one of the instructors, it was really, really great to see students get the information that they need, right? Remember earlier tonight, I talked about some students, they never learn punctuation, they never learn the rules that they need to know for these tests. So I saw some increases on the ACT as high as like 7 or 8 composite points. Remember, each section is only out of 36. So I saw some students getting like 6 or 7 or even 8 section score improvement. So we're talking about like a 20% improvement, right? So yeah, it's usually, and I tell my students this, and then they always say, yeah, that's right, right? After they take the test, is you just didn't know these rules, right? And I guarantee once you learn these rules, it'll all make more sense. And I even had some students, they were trying ACT on their own. For example, one student, he was getting like 33 out of 36. And then he was just missing some of that information, and I gave it to him, and then he was getting like 35, even 36 in some of his tests. And that's a full score, right? So yeah, usually just missing information for a lot of students for SAT, ACT. They never teach this in school anyway. There is PSAT, but students aren't prepared from teachers for PSAT anyway. So there's also that. We have options, we have 1 month, 2 month, and 3 month options. We have SAT, we have ACT, we have math and science and English. We have all these sections. So, feel free to contact Lindsay if you have more questions about this. I would say, try it and see how your student does. And then what I can usually do is, I've had students come to me like, okay, I took this diagnostic, I took ACT and SAT, and I look at the results, I look at the type of questions that the students missed, and I can usually tell right away, like, okay, so you're maybe probably better for this test or that test, and here are your strengths, here are your weaknesses, focus on this. Depending on their, I would say, score, their initial score, their profile, their extracurriculars, how much free time they have. We can probably work out, like what's a good idea, what's a plan for raising the scores to a higher level, right? So yeah, we said that 75% of students applying to colleges who are test optional, they reported the test score, and those are the ones, right, or are accepted. So again, 75% of the incoming freshmen, that class, did report a test score. So I would say, this is my personal opinion, my personal takeaway from all this is, yeah, they say SAT, ACT is optional, or it's like not as important. But, if they say it's optional, it doesn't mean they never look at it. So for test optional schools, I would just treat them as required, honestly. For UCs, right, like they're looking at GPA and APs, right? Because it's always like, what did they not say, right? Or what are they implying, right? And that's again, what we want to, where we want to position ourselves, in addition to using saving our summers, right, for things that can help us stand out more, because a lot of students do have SAT and ACT scores, like we saw, right? More than half of students took a test, so we still have to stand out more beyond that.
All right, thank you, Daniel, for sharing. And if parents have any further questions regarding to SAT or summer planning, this is the time that we are helping our students working on their summer camp applications. So for any questions like that, feel free to reach out to us. You can reach us through emails, phone calls, or you can add me on WeChat. And also, if you're interested to join our WeChat group to receive the future webinar informations, please add me and I will invite you to our groups. All right, thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing, and thank you for everybody attend our webinar. We'll see you next Saturday, same time.